Good afternoon, my dears. I'm Gertrude Olson, but everyone here calls me Miss G. I'm 72 years old, and my current address isn't conventional. I've lived in the Wisconsin Women's Correctional Facility for almost 60 years, but don't be alarmed. I wasn't alarmed when I arrived either. My little life here has a peaceful routine now. My favorite pastime is reading. The library here isn't much, but I always find ways to get new books. I've read everything: novels, biographies, history, but poetry holds a special place in my heart. Well-placed words transport me beyond these gray walls. At night, when they open the yard for what I call moonbathing, I sit in a corner and look at the sky. It's amazing how the stars continue to shine, even for those who are imprisoned. I sit there quietly, thinking about life, the twists the world takes, the choices we made, and the ones that were made for us. I started enjoying reading here in prison. Before, I hardly had time, or perhaps I didn't have the peace of mind to focus on words. A volunteer teacher, Elaine, taught me the pleasure of reading. She once told me, "Gertrude, as long as your mind can travel, no cell will truly imprison you." Wasn't she right? Today, I'll tell a story I've kept for a long time. It's about how a mistake can transform into justice, about how sometimes we need to go through hell to find some kind of peace. It's not a pretty story, but it's my story, and maybe it can serve as a warning to someone who needs it. I was born in Springfield, Missouri in 1953, when things were simpler, but also harder. My father, John Olson, worked in a coal mine. He was a tall man with hands as rough as old leather, always with that distant look, as if seeing something no one else could see. My mother, Zelda, was a skilled seamstress who made dresses that women in the area fought over. Our house was in the most remote part of town. Simple construction with an old roof and dirt floor in the back. We had a large yard with chickens, an apple tree, and a peach tree my father planted when I was born. For the child to have something to eat, he would say, but those trees seemed more like decoration than food. No one encouraged me to pick the fruits, as if they weren't meant for me. I shared a room with my brother David, who was 5 years younger than me. David was a small boy with large, curious eyes, who seemed to see the world as a magical place. While I had learned early on that magic didn't exist in that house, David still believed. He was fragile, born with health problems, breathes wrong, my father would say, as if the simple act of breathing could be done incorrectly. But it wasn't David's fault. He had a heart murmur and needed special care. At night, when my father came home from work, the house felt different. The air seemed heavier, loaded with invisible tension. We would eat dinner in silence, with only the tinkling of forks on plates. If David coughed during meals, my father would bang on the table. "This boy came with a defect," he would mumble. The nights were the worst. After the lights went out, the walls seemed to whisper. Many nights I heard footsteps in the hallway, then David's bedroom door would open. My mother said she was checking if he was breathing right, but the moans I heard didn't sound like medical care. Many times I put the pillow over my head so I wouldn't hear. At school, I had few friends. Ivy and Dorothy were the only ones who came close. The other girls seemed to sense something strange about me, as if I carried a dark cloud. Once I heard a classmate's mother say, "Don't play with that girl. There's something wrong with that family." And there was, only no one did anything about it. The worst day of my childhood was when I turned 10. There was no party or cake. My father just called me into the living room and said, "Now you're old enough to understand some things." That was the first time he called me a mistake. He said I was born to bring misfortune to the family, that since my birth, only bad things had happened, including David's defective birth. That night, I cried myself to sleep and dreamed of a place far away from Springfield, a place where no one called me a mistake, where David could breathe without pain, where the apples in the yard were for eating, and not just for looking at. Things got stranger when I turned 14. David, at 9 years old, was becoming increasingly fragile. Although we had never seen a real doctor, my parents said they knew how to care for him better than any doctor in town. One afternoon in July 1967, I came back from school and noticed a car I had never seen before parked in front of our house. A man in a suit was talking quietly with my father on the porch. When he saw me coming, my father sent me in through the back door. Through the kitchen window, I saw the man hand my father a briefcase. It looked heavy. Then they shook hands like people closing an important deal. When the car drove away, my father came in with that rare smile on his lips, the kind that only appeared when something pleased him greatly. "Zelda, what we needed has arrived," he shouted, going straight to the basement, a damp, dark place with an always locked door. That night, The two of them spent hours down there. What frightened me most wasn't the time they spent in the basement, but the silence that followed. Normally I could hear David's moans through the thin wall. That night, nothing. A heavy silence, as if the air had been sucked from the house. The next morning, when I asked about David, my mother only said, "He's resting. Better not disturb him." 3 days passed like this, 3 days without seeing my brother. On the 4th day, I overheard a conversation between my parents. "I don't think it's working, John," my mother said, her voice trembling. "It has to work. The man guaranteed this was what we needed. But look how he's worse than before. It's the adjustment. His body is getting used to it. And if someone finds out, the school is already asking questions." My father lowered his voice to an angry whisper. "No one will discover anything. I already told the school he has measles. And if it goes wrong, well, the fault is hers anyway." At that moment, I understood that hers was the mistake, the cause of everything bad, the curse. That night, I found the courage to go to David's room. The door was locked. I put my ear to the wood and called softly, "David, it's me, Gertrude. Are you okay?" A long silence followed. Then, a weak moan. "It hurts, Gertie. It hurts a lot," he whispered, using the nickname only he called me. "What hurts, David? What did they do to you?" "I don't know. There's something on my arm, and they, they film, film. Why film a sick boy?" Before I could ask more, I heard footsteps and ran to my room. The next day, my parents announced they were going to Joplin to get medicine for David. They would be back tomorrow. That was strange. They had never left me alone at home before. When I returned from school, their car was already gone. I went straight to David's room, but the door was still locked. Then I noticed something. The basement door was unlocked. A thin ray of light escaped through the crack. My heart accelerated. In all my 14 years, I had never been in that basement. I went down the wooden steps slowly, each one making the old boards creak. The smell was the first thing I noticed, a strong smell of chemicals, mixed with something sweet and rotten. The basement wasn't large, but it was organized like some kind of improvised doctor's office. There was a cot in the center with leather straps at the ends, a table with instruments I had never seen before, jars with strange colored liquids, and, in a corner, a movie projector. Next to it, a stack of round cans, films. I felt my stomach turn. Driven by an impulse I couldn't control, I picked up one of the cans, opened it, and put the reel in the projector. I turned on the device, pointing it at the white wall. The images that appeared made me fall to my knees. It was David, my little David, strapped to that same cot. My father was giving him an injection in the arm, while my mother adjusted something on a device nearby. My brother's face was contorted in pain, but there was no sound in the film, just raw black and white images of his suffering. I changed to another film, and another, and another. Years of treatments, years of experiments, years of my brother being used as a test subject. Some films showed procedures so cruel I had to turn away. The last film showed David much thinner, almost unrecognizable. He no longer moved, just stared fixedly at the camera as if pleading. When the projection ended, I stood there in the dark, unable to cry, unable to scream. A numbness took over my body. It was no longer pain or fear I felt. It was something else, something growing inside me like a storm. I went back upstairs and pushed against David's door with all my strength. The old lock gave way. The door opened with a crack. The room was empty, the bed made as if no one had slept there for days. On the wall, a calendar where my mother marked the days with a red X. The last mark was from 3 weeks ago. I sat on his bed and finally, the tears came. I cried for hours, hugging the pillow that still had his smell. That same night, I found a box under my parents' bed. Inside were letters from some special research institute, letters mentioning payments for results, mentioning how the specimen was perfect for tests due to his rare cardiac condition. The specimen was David. My brother had been sold for experiments, not just sold, but used by his own parents as a guinea pig for years. The last letter congratulated my parents on the data collected and regretted the loss of the specimen, but assured that the information would be valuable for science. There was a check attached, an amount that for our humble family was a fortune. That it was as if something inside me broke. It wasn't me who was the family curse. It wasn't me who was the mistake. The real mistake was right there before my eyes. I spent the night awake, sitting in the kitchen, the evidence spread on the table, waiting. The hatred growing inside me was calm, almost serene. When the sun began to rise, I heard the car arriving. I heard my parents' excited voices talking about new orders they were bringing. When they opened the door and saw me sitting there with all the evidence exposed, their faces changed. I didn't see fear as I expected. I saw anger, as if I had ruined something very precious. "So the curse discovered our little secret," my father said, throwing the briefcase on the floor. For the first time in my life, I didn't lower my head. I looked directly at them and asked, "What did you do with David? Where is my brother?" My mother's answer hit me like a slap. "Buried in the yard under that apple tree you like so much. It's the only service that useless boy provided, fertilizing a tree." My mother's words echoed in my head as I looked at those two strangers in front of me, because that's what they were. Strangers, not father and mother, not family. "You're not going to tell anyone," my father said, not as a question, but as an order. "No one would believe a girl like you." My mother approached, her perfume sickening. She caressed my hair in a way that should have seemed maternal, but only gave me chills. "Gertrude, my daughter, you need to understand, what we did was important for science. Your brother was already doomed anyway with that defective heart. At least this way, his short life served something greater." I pushed her hand away. "Something greater? You tortured him. I saw the films. He begged you to stop." My father punched the table. "You don't understand anything. That institute approached us when they learned of his rare condition. They offered us money. Lots of money. Do you know what we can do with that money?" "I never asked for any of that," I whispered. "I just wanted you to love David, to love me." My mother let out a cold laugh. Love doesn't fill stomachs, girl. Love doesn't pay bills." That night, I was locked in the basement, the same basement where my brother had suffered for years. They said they needed to think about what to do with me, that I knew too much, that maybe the institute would be interested in a new volunteer. 2 days passed. They came down to give me water and hard bread. On the third day, the man in the suit returned. I heard his footsteps upstairs, his deep voice mixed with my parents', then footsteps on the basement stairs. He was younger than I imagined, perhaps 30, with round glasses and hair combed back with brilliant. He carried a clipboard and looked at me as if I were a curious object in a display case. "This is the girl?" he asked. "Yes, doctor. As I mentioned, she discovered everything." The man approached, held my chin, turned my face from one side to the other like someone examining fruit at the market. "Healthy, older than the boy, but she do. The institute is also interested in cases of female hysteria. So the agreement continues?" My mother asked anxiously. "With some modifications. This one will need different dosages and signed documentation, as if it were a voluntary admission to a psychiatric clinic." I completely understood then. They were going to hand me over, as they had done with David. I would be the next volunteer, the next contribution to science. That night, my mother came down to the basement alone. She knelt beside me, thinking I was asleep. "You know, I never wanted children," she began. "Your father was the one who insisted, when you were born. So difficult, crying so much. I thought you would be the only one. Then came David with that weak heart. It was like a punishment." She paused. "But now I see it was a blessing. The money we received for David's data, and now you will be able to start over far from here." Not once did she mention guilt or regret. Not once did she sound like a mother talking about her daughter. It was as if she were talking about merchandise. When she finally left, I opened my eyes and faced the darkness. Something had changed inside me. Fear gave way to cold determination. I would not be the next contribution to science. The next morning, when my father came down with breakfast, he was careless. He left the basement door ajar when he left. I waited, listening intently. Voices came from my parents' bedroom, arguing about what they would do with the money. I went to the kitchen drawer and took out a knife, not to use it, at least not at that moment, just to defend myself. Then, without making noise, I went out the back door. My first impulse was to run, to flee as far as possible, but then my eyes landed on the apple tree. The same apple tree where, according to my mother, David was buried underneath. I approached slowly. The soil looked normal with no signs of having been disturbed. At that moment, I heard a scream from the house. They had discovered I had escaped. I ran with no certain destination. An old lady sweeping the sidewalk looked at me strangely dirty, disheveled, with a knife in my hand. "Girl, is everything all right?" she asked, genuinely concerned. Before I could answer, my father's shout came from behind. "Catch her. She's having an episode. She needs help." The lady backed away, frightened, looking from my terrified face to the knife in my hand. Of course she would believe him, not me. I ended up hiding in the bushes behind the town cemetery, trembling, trying to think. If I returned home, no, that wasn't an option. If I tried to tell someone, who would believe a teenager accusing her own parents? After 3 days of fleeing, starving and desperate, I made a decision. I would return home not to surrender, but to get the evidence, the films, the letters. Without them, it was just my word against theirs. I waited until late afternoon when my father would be at work. I saw my mother leave for the grocery store. I entered through the back. The film cans were there, stacked in a corner. The letters too. I put everything in a cloth bag. I was about to leave when I heard footsteps above. I knew you would come back. My mother's cold voice came from the top of the stairs. She began to descend slowly. In her hands, she carried a syringe filled with a yellowish liquid. The doctor left this in case you gave trouble, she said, showing the syringe, to calm you, to make the transition smoother. I backed up until I hit the wall. There was nowhere to run. What happened next seems like a blur in my memory. I remember the quick movement I made, the metallic sound, her scream, and then the silence. When I regained full consciousness, my mother was lying on the basement floor. Blood, a lot of blood. I went up the stairs, staggering, still holding the bag with the evidence. In the kitchen, I vomited. Then I sat at the table, staring at nothing, waiting. The clock read 7 when I heard my father's car packing. I didn't move. I continued sitting at the table, the evidence spread out in front of me, my hands stained red. Zelda, where are you? His voice echoed through the house. The footsteps approached the kitchen. When my father appeared at the door, his face quickly went from surprise to fury. What did you do? He growled. Where is your mother? In the basement, I replied, my voice too calm. With David, where they both belong. He grabbed me by the arm, lifting me from the chair with such force I felt my shoulder pop. What do you mean by that? What did you do? I just looked into his eyes without blinking, without fear. That seemed to frighten him more than any words. He ran to the basement. The scream I heard next didn't seem human. When he returned to the kitchen, he seemed to have aged 10 years. You destroyed everything, he said, his voice low and dangerous. All our work, all the money. What future built on David's suffering? I stood up to face him. You are not humans. You are monsters, and monsters need to be stopped. The slap threw me back in the chair. I tasted blood in my mouth, but I didn't look away. He began to collect the evidence, stuffing everything into a bag. I'll solve this. I can still fix it. I'll call the doctor. As he spoke frantically, I began to understand. There was no remorse there, just fear of being discovered, of losing the money. How much? I asked. What? How much did they pay for David? What was the price of your own son? For a moment, I saw something breaking in his eyes, a spark of humanity trying to emerge, but it was quickly suffocated. Money enough to get us out of this miserable life, but now you've ruined everything. He finished gathering the evidence and went to the wood stove. He began to throw the films and letters into the fire. One by one, he watched the records of David's suffering being consumed by flames. No one will believe you, he said as the evidence turned to ashes. Who will listen to a troubled girl? When he turned to get something from the drawer, I saw the metallic gleam of a knife. My body reacted before my mind could process. I grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the stove, and in a quick movement hit his head. The sound was horrible. He fell like a sack of potatoes. He didn't move again. I stood there, the skillet still in my hand, looking at the body on the kitchen floor. A terrible calmness came over me. I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel remorse. I just felt relief, as if an immense weight had been removed from my shoulders. I went out to the yard and looked at the apple tree. Was David really buried there, or was it another cruel lie? I grabbed a shovel from the tool shed and began to dig, driven by a need I couldn't explain. I don't know how long I dug. My hands formed blisters that burst and bled. When the shovel finally hit something solid, my heart stopped. It was a box, a small wooden box, too small for a body. When I opened it, I found inside only an old teddy bear, David's favorite, along with a piece of paper with my mother's handwriting, Experiment 37, discarded in the river. I fell to my knees, sobbing. They hadn't even given my brother a real grave. They had just discarded him like trash. That night, sitting in the yard with David's teddy bear in my lap, I had a strange dream. Although I was wide awake, I saw my brother, Not as he was in the last films, but as he was before everything began, smiling with those large, curious eyes. He didn't say anything, just smiled and pointed to the stars. When I looked up, I saw a shooting star crossing Springfield's dark sky. I made a wish, the most sincere of my life, that no child ever go through what we went through. Tomorrow came, and with it the need to decide what to do. There was no going back. My life as I knew it had ended in that kitchen. I could flee, try to reach a larger city where no one knew me. But what if the institute found me? What if there were other people involved, other doctors looking for specimens? That's when I decided I wouldn't flee. I wouldn't hide. I would do what no one would expect. I took a bath, put on the most presentable clothes I had, carefully combed my hair. Then I walked to the town's police station. It was Sunday morning. The streets were almost empty. At the police station, there was only one guard on duty, Theodore, a middle-aged man who sometimes played cards with my father. "Gertrude, what are you doing here?" he asked, confused. "It's about my father that I came to talk," I replied, my voice firm. I told everything without emotion, without tears, just facts. The experiments with David, the institute's letters, the money, the plans for me, what happened in the basement, what I did in the kitchen, the teddy bear under the apple tree, the body in the river. At first, the guard looked at me with skepticism, then with growing horror. "Girl, this is very serious. Do you have proof of all this?" I had, I replied honestly, films, letters, but my father burned everything before I stopped him. He ran his hand over his face. "Without evidence, it's your word against no one now." "I don't need people to believe everything," I finally said. "I just need them to see what's there at home, and then do what you have to do with me." The guard called for backup. An hour later, our house was surrounded by police. They found exactly what I said they would find: my mother's body in the basement, my father's body in the kitchen, the improvised laboratory, the small box with David's teddy bear under the apple tree. What they didn't find were the proofs of the experiments. Everything had turned to ashes. I was taken to the police station, not as a witness, but as a suspect. The main suspect, the troubled daughter, who killed her parents in a fit of madness after the death of her sick brother. The trial was quick. Without evidence of the abuse, without witnesses besides myself, the verdict was predictable. Considered mentally unstable but aware of my actions, I was convicted of double homicide. Being a minor, I would serve time until I was 21 in an institution for juvenile offenders, then be transferred to a regular penitentiary. The night before my transfer, Officer Theodore visited me. "Gertrude," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about your case. Something doesn't add up." He showed me a photograph of a man in a dark suit with brown glasses and hair combed back exactly like the doctor who visited our house. "This man was seen in Springfield on the dates you mentioned, then disappeared. No one knows who he is or what institute he worked for. It's as if he never existed." "So you believe me?" I asked. He hesitated. "Let's say I have enough doubts to not accept the official version, but without concrete evidence." "I know," I interrupted, "without the films, without the letters, it's just my word. I'll continue investigating," he promised. That was the last time I saw Officer Theodore. Months later, I learned he had been transferred to another town after insisting on reopening my case without superior authorization. And so, at 14, I began my life in the prison system, a life far from Springfield, far from the memories, but never completely free from the nightmares. The years in the juvenile institution were hard, but in a way less cruel than my own home. For the first time in my life, I had 3 meals a day, a mattress all my own, and no one calling me a mistake or a curse. Of course, it wasn't paradise. The other girls avoided me, whispering about the crazy girl who killed her parents, but I discovered I had a facility with numbers, with mathematics. "It's rare to see someone with so much talent for calculations," said teacher Henrietta, an elderly lady who was the first person to treat me like a human being in a long time. She encouraged me to continue studying. "Knowledge is the only thing no one can take from you, Gertrude," she told me. "Not even bars can contain a mind that decides to fly." In 1974, when I turned 21, I was transferred to the Wisconsin Women's Correctional Facility. Teacher Henrietta came to say goodbye and gave me a package. "Only open it when you get there," she said with tears in her eyes. Inside was a book, The Little Prince. On the first page, she had written, "To Gertrude, who even in the most distant stars will find her way back." It was my first book, the first of many, and it was the beginning of my salvation. Over the following decades, I studied through correspondence courses. In 1987, at 34 years old, I received my degree in mathematics. There was no ceremony, just a paper that arrived by mail. But it meant everything. I initiated a literacy program for the inmates. Women of all ages came to my improvised classroom to learn to read, write, and calculate. Women who, like me, had committed mistakes but deserved a second chance at education. I met people who changed my life naturally, who became my first real friend. Sister Elizabeth, a volunteer nun who brought me books and poetry. Amy Theodore, Officer Theodore's granddaughter, who years later brought me evidence that my story wasn't a fabrication. The photographs of the mysterious doctor, newspaper clippings about clandestine experiments, testimonies from other families. It wasn't enough to reopen my case formally, but it was confirmation that I hadn't invented everything. "What do you intend to do with this?" I asked Amy. "It depends on you," she replied. "We can try a criminal review." I thought for a long moment. Even with a favorable review, I've already served more than any alternative sentence, and I have no interest in leaving the facility now. My work is here. It was true. I had built something meaningful within these walls, a life with purpose, helping hundreds of women over the years. Now at 72, I live a peaceful routine here. My days begin early at 5 in the morning, long before the official call. I like this moment of absolute silence when the world is still sleeping. I sit on the edge of my bed and observe the first rays of sun filtering through the bars, creating geometric patterns on the concrete floor, a daily spectacle I never tire of admiring. After coffee comes my favorite part of the morning, the classes. Although officially retired, I still receive a group of older ladies 3 times a week. We call our meeting Coffee with Mathematics. They teach me about life, about family recipes, about small joys. I teach them how to manage money, how to calculate time remaining on sentences, how to understand percentages and fractions. 3 times a week I have the privilege of an additional hour in the yard at night for astronomical observation. In these moments, I sit on a concrete bench away from the bright spotlights. From there, I can see a generous piece of sky framed by the high walls. I can identify constellations, planets, even some satellites that silently cross above. It was during one of these contemplation sessions that I had an epiphany. Looking at Vega, one of the brightest stars in our sky, I remembered that its light took 25 years to reach us. Our acts and choices travel through time, affecting people long after they were made. The horrible experiments my parents performed on David affected not only my brother at that moment but my entire subsequent life, and by extension the lives of all the women I helped in here. Like waves expanding in a lake, our actions have consequences that go far beyond what we can imagine. This reflection brought me a peace I never imagined possible. It's not that I've forgiven my parents. I don't know if I'll ever reach that point, but I understood that in some mysterious way, the horror we lived through served something greater. David's pain, my imprisonment, everything transformed into a force that allowed me to help hundreds of women over the decades. On Sundays, I receive visits from former students who passed through the facility and are now free. They bring news of the outside world, photos of their children and grandchildren, sometimes a homemade cake. It's my form of family built, not by blood ties, but by deeper connections. When people ask me if I regret what I did in that kitchen in Springfield so many decades ago, I answer honestly, I regret the pain, not the justice. If I could go back in time, maybe I would seek another path. But in that Springfield of the 60s, under those circumstances, who can say what would have happened? What I know for sure is that, in some mysterious way, prison freed me. Between these walls, I found a freedom I never knew in the outside world. The freedom to build something meaningful, to help other women, to find beauty even in the most unlikely places. When I look at the stars in my night sessions in the yard, I feel a profound connection with the universe. The same stars that David and I admired from the shade of the apple tree in Springfield are still there, unchanging in their distant beauty. And somehow that comforts me. Somehow it makes me feel that everything is exactly as it should be. Epilogue. My dears who have come with me to this point in this journey, I have some final words to share. If you are going through moments of deep darkness, know that even on the darkest nights, the stars are still there, even if temporarily invisible. I learned that age doesn't define our strength but our ability to start each day anew. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. Remember, you have the power to transform your pain into purpose. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it's possible. I am living proof of that. If you know someone who is suffering, extend your hand. Be the teacher Henrietta, the Natalie, the sister Elizabeth in someone's life. Sometimes a small gesture can literally save a life. It's never too late to seek help. It's never too late to start over. True strength isn't in never falling, but in rising every time. Surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Thank you for listening to me, for allowing a 72-year-old woman from inside a prison in Madison to perhaps touch your lives in some way. Each night when I look at the sky, I'll remember you. The stars still shine, even for those behind bars, and they shine for you too.